After 15 seasons and 250 rants, Rick Mercer and his weekly report aired one last time on CBC Television earlier this year. With so much political news in the headlines, does Mercer regret ending his show? Let's ask him and find out more about his new book, The Final Report. And Rick Mercer joins me now. Hi.
Hello.
How are you? It's great to meet you. It's great to have you on the show.
It's great to be here.
It's a huge thrill for me.
I'm an avid watcher.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm glad you say that, because I wanted to start off by asking you, when I knew you were coming, I got very excited, and just like I do with everyone who has a book.
Of course.
I actually did sit down to read your entire book. I read your entire book, word for word, until I got to the page 166, right. And I thought maybe you could read an excerpt here that I've highlighted. Because it was a particular...
Now I have to put my glasses on national television. Okay. At least it is considered... Okay, What kind of person sits down every day at 5 o'clock and watches Power and Politics on the CBC News Network? Well, as a TV professional, I have seen the data, and I can tell you exactly how many people do that. Me and 6 others, two of whom can't summon the energy to change the channel or the will to live. That's it's all tongue-in-cheek.
Right, of course, yes.
It's all tongue-in-cheek.
I think you were making a greater point, which I was so glad that I had read 165 pages to get to, but the greater point that there is somewhat of a level of political apathy out there.
Well, there is. There absolutely is. But I think it's actually shows like this that make a really big difference. I mean, the more apathetic, the more important a show like this is. How is that?
Good save. Great save. I wanted to know, when I was reading through your rants, I was thinking, there has been so much stuff since you stopped doing them. And I wondered, do you ever regret, do you ever feel like you bailed too early?
Well, yes and no. There's times where I'm on the phone with a friend and I'm just going and going and going, and they'll say, so you're not missing your show at all, are you? Because you haven't stopped talking in 15 minutes or what have you. So there are times where I absolutely want to talk and rant. There are also times that I'm so kind of disgusted with the level of partisanship that I'm glad that it's not my job to rant that week. So it's a two-edged sword. I go both ways.
When was the last time you were disgusted by what you heard?
About an hour ago, I think it was about an hour ago. Pretty sure it was in the car on the way over. Yeah.
When I read through a lot of your rants, one of the things that stuck out to me, and the producer who was working on the segment, was things like treatment of veterans, actual answers in QP, voting, wanting to vote, or even like decency when you're driving. Those issues have not gone anywhere.
No. No.
Is that gratifying to you or depressing?
Well, I don't think that, respect for veterans or the way veterans are treated, I think we moved, not I, but I think the goalpost has moved, and that has improved by and large. I think there was a time where it was, veterans were just a budget line and government was doing everything they could do just to reduce that number no matter what. I think that's changed, for example. But obviously, as time goes on, the issues are going to remain the same. They just change a little bit. So I was always partisanship, that hasn't improved, for example. Young people getting involved in politics, I think, has improved. In the last election, the numbers were very good, very, very promising. And one of the things that I was most pleased with in the 15 years of the show was when we got to take part in the vote mobs, and we had social media campaigns encouraging people to vote, and I love doing that. And I think you just saw south of the border, the youth numbers increased dramatically. So that's a bright spot.
When you're looking back over your rants and picking ones that you wanted to include, were there any of them that particularly stuck out for you as you would consider the most meaningful or the most memorable?
Well, as time went on, the rants changed. Originally, they were almost always about federal politics. And I never tried, I tried to avoid getting in the weeds too much provincially, just because I was aware of the fact that you had a national audience, and maybe people in New Brunswick didn't really care about this issue that affects Saskatchewan or vice versa. So it was always national issues, and usually political. Then I started realizing they didn't always have to be political. They could be about why Canadians can't operate escalators properly. And then sometimes they were just about what was on my mind that week, and they didn't necessarily have to be comedic either. I mean, when Gord Downey passed away, certainly that was something that was on my mind and everyone of my generation's mind. And I think 5 years earlier, I would have thought, no, it's not appropriate to do a rant when someone dies. But it wasn't so much a rant, it was kind of a toast to him. It was an anecdote about him that I was aware of, that I thought spoke to the character of the man. And that's one that resonated with a lot of people, and I certainly included in the book because it just showed that a rant can be many different things.
Do you miss being able, and not just the idea of doing rants or the type of job you have, but the way in which it did resonate? I mean, people would respond to them, especially, ones that really gripped them in large numbers. And I don't know, I just feel like you had an ability to connect with people that not a lot of others do.
I always viewed the entire show as wrapped around the rant, even though I loved the travel and I loved all that adventure stuff that we did. And that was a huge privilege to be able to do that. But I was always really, aware of the platform that I had because it was 1 million viewers. And because it was 1 million viewers, you knew that you were talking to people that weren't all left-wing or all right-wing. You were talking to a wide spectrum. And that's harder and harder to find now because people are cherry-picking and they're just going to the source, that suits their opinion. And I knew, I've known people that say, every time your rant would come on, Dad would say, I leave the room for this part of the show. But then he would never leave the room. But he would make a point of saying, I leave. So I got to talk to that guy as well as people who maybe agreed with me more often than not.
Are you still as addicted to politics? You talk about that in the book as well.
Yeah, I'd say it was always my baseball. It was always my sport, and it still is. I mean, that's why I watch this show, and I still love it.
One of the 6 who do. Thank you. Okay.
Tongue in cheek.
I know. I'm just teasing. Before we go, I did want because you are missing from our airwaves when all this stuff is happening, which you could even just say in the last 72 hours, for example.
Yeah.
I wanted to get your take on some of those events quickly. So starting with Tony Clement.
Well, I am glad that it is not my job to sit around today and come up with a comment or a treatment for the no-no bits of any former Harper cabinet minister. That's not on my radar, and I'm perfectly comfortable with that.
That's a good answer. Donald Trump.
Well, for people in my business and your business, the problem is he's sucking all the oxygen out of the room, no matter what the subject matter is. You could say, what has to happen in Canada to knock Donald Trump down one notch on Twitter? Well, today we saw it, but
just today, yeah.
Unfortunately, just today. And with my show, we operated in this little pretend universe where we said, the Obama White House doesn't exist, Trump doesn't exist, the Kardashians don't exist, pop culture outside of Canada doesn't exist. Other people can cover all that. We're only talking about Canada. It's Canadian music, It's Canadian stories, it's only traveling in Canada. And I think it would be harder to do that show this year with Donald Trump because no matter what I was doing, I could be in Nunavut and people would say, why aren't you talking about the fact he just fired Sessions? Talk about that. And I understand that frustration, but I'm glad that I'm not doing it for that reason.
Doug Ford?
Yeah, there he is. That's... I know. Really, I could just spend, because he would be someone I could rant about nationally because he is now the de facto conservative leader of Canada. I'm surprised the New Maclean's cover that he wasn't in the middle. That was nice of him. He should have been. He's the leader, right? He's the one with the big job. Yeah, he's the de facto conservative leader of Canada. He's the future of conservatism.
That leads me to my last 3, of course, 3 running to be prime minister next year. Andrew Scheer. Oh,
you want me to talk about each one of them?
Yeah. What's your take?
My take on Andrew Scheer.
You talk a bit about it in the book as well.
Well, I think Andrew Scheer has had some hits, but I think he has real misses too. Like when he comes out and says, I would have signed a better deal. I think that just resonates as entirely ridiculous. Like no one can make those statements. And we've entered into a time where people say, just go out and say this insane thing and people will buy it. It's just, that's ridiculous for him saying things like that. But I think if he continues to, hammer on at Trudeau about, virtue signaling and, I think Trudeau's very vulnerable.
That's my next. What about Justin Trudeau?
Very vulnerable.
In what way?
I don't mean sensitive, vulnerable, like he cries. I don't mean like that.
He does that sometimes too.
He does do that too. Yeah.
And finally, Mr. Singh, Jagmeet Singh, who emerged.
I follow him on Instagram, and his Instagram, the stories are entirely ridiculous. He does things like, I'm standing here in front of the Supreme Court. You go, he's got my vote.
All right.
That's it. Just in front. Okay.
All right, that's it. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate this, and everyone should read this book. It's actually hilarious,
Thank you
even
very
beyond
much.
page 166.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rick.